Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving back into some entitled people stories. Welcome back. Today's stories are about people who tried to claim what wasn't theirs and got a reality check. In one, a boss tries to steal credit for a massive project until a single page of truth ruins his promotion interview. In another, a neighbor obsessed with a dandelion-free lawn gets a yard full of seeds. And in the last, a new homeowner has to tow a neighbor's SUV to reclaim her own driveway. At the end, we'll decide whose revenge was the most elegant, and you can vote for the best story in the comments. He thought he could present my work as his own. I worked incredibly hard to land a job I genuinely loved. It wasn't just a paycheck situation either. I was good at it, like actually good. My team trusted me, leaned on me, and treated me like a core part of the operation. The pay was decent, the workload was manageable, and for once in my career, I didn't dread Monday mornings. Everything felt solid, stable, and earned. Then I made what I now refer to as my 5% mistake. An internal position opened up in another department. Same role on paper, same company, but with a 5% pay bump. It didn't sound like a huge leap, but at the time it felt like progress, career growth, a smart move. I told myself I'd be doing the same work just for slightly more money. So I applied, got it, and transferred over. I knew I'd screwed up within the first hour. My first meeting in the new department was led by the operations manager, my new boss, and it was brutal. There were only 5 of us in the room. One of them was a junior manager presenting a draft slide deck. He'd made a small wording mistake, not a data error, not a missed deadline, just phrasing. The boss zeroed in on it like a shark smelling blood. He tore into this poor guy in front of everyone, mocking him, interrupting him mid-sentence, and questioning his competence until the guy's voice cracked. By the end of it, he was visibly holding back tears. No one stopped it, no one pushed back. Everyone just stared at the table and waited for it to end. I sat there thinking, what the hell did I walk into? The rest of the team was actually fine. Talented, helpful, normal humans, but leadership sets the tone, and that tone was aggressive, petty, and cruel. I should have trusted my gut and left immediately. Instead, I stayed. A few months later, I was put in charge of a massive project. This thing ran for nearly 2 years and touched multiple departments. I wasn't just involved, I ran it. I built the timelines, coordinated stakeholders, handled escalations, documented decisions, and fixed problems before most people even realized they existed. When something went wrong, people came to me. When something needed explaining, I explained it. Internally, everyone knew I was the point person. Except my boss. When the final review meeting with the director rolled around, I was expecting to present. That's how it had always been done. Instead, my boss stepped in at the last minute and said, "I'll take this one." I watched him walk through my slides, my work, my decisions, and every time the director asked a question, he answered it as if he'd personally orchestrated the entire thing. No acknowledgement, no, the team did this, no mention of my name, just him soaking up the credit like it was always his. I remember sitting there thinking, wow, so that's who you are. That moment's quite the betrayal. He didn't just take credit, he performed ownership of your work in front of the people whose opinion mattered most. It's one thing to be a bad boss in private, it's another to publicly rewrite history to erase you. That's when you knew the cost of that 5% wasn't just stress, it was your professional identity. Not long after that, I transferred out of the department entirely. Same company, different area, less chaos, better leadership, a little less money, sure, but infinitely more peace. I didn't make a big deal out of leaving, I just quietly moved on and rebuilt my momentum elsewhere. About 6 months later, I got a phone call. It was my old boss. He sounded frantic. "Hey, I've got a really important interview coming up," he said. "Big promotion opportunity, but I can't find the project pack for that initiative you ran. You know, the big one? You still have it?" I paused for half a second, then said, "Yeah, I've got it. I can send it over." "Please," he said, "as soon as you can." So I pulled up the old files. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. But before I sent it, I added one small thing. A roles and responsibilities page. Nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated, just a clean breakdown of who did what on the project, and under Project Lead, I put my name. Under pretty much every major responsibility, planning, execution, stakeholder management, risk mitigation, my name appeared again. Because that was the truth. I sent the pack over and went about my day. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a former coworker from that department. "You are not going to believe this," he said, laughing. "Your old boss just finished his interview." "Oh," I said, "how did it go?" "Well," he continued, "he walked in telling them he ran that big project, talked about how he managed X, Y, and Z. Then he pulled up the project pack to back it all up." "And?" I asked, already knowing. "And the interviewer flipped to the responsibilities page," my coworker said, "and your name was everywhere." Apparently, my old boss went completely off script. He stumbled, tried to explain that he'd overseen the work, then got visibly rattled. According to my coworker, it threw him so badly that the rest of the interview never recovered. The panel kept asking detailed follow-up questions, and without the ability to claim my work as his own, he floundered. My coworker also told me that when my boss later complained, several people backed me up. They confirmed that, yes, I'd been the lead. Yes, I'd done the work. No, this wasn't new information. My boss was furious at me, at the document, at the universe. But he didn't get the promotion. I like to think I played a very small, very accurate part in that outcome. Funny how 5% more pay isn't worth it when it costs you integrity, and how the truth written plainly on one page can do more damage than any argument ever could. What gets me is how predictable his reaction was. Not embarrassment for misrepresenting the work, not self-reflection, just anger that the document existed. That tells you he genuinely believed the narrative he'd built should have held up. But facts have a way of staying stubborn. You didn't insert opinions or commentary, just names next to responsibilities. It's hard to argue with something that clean. And let's be real, if he had actually supported the project instead of absorbing it, he could have walked into that interview proudly saying he empowered a strong lead and delivered results through the team. Panels love that. Instead, he tried to be the hero of a story everyone else knew the ending to. And our second story. Bylaw said my yard was fine. My neighbor didn't like that, so I made sure he'd never forget the difference between a weed and petty revenge. I'm 24, living in my first place on my own. I'd rented a townhouse. This was back in the late 80s, even when poor people could rent entire houses, and was putting myself through college. Not a lot of money to spare, but I was getting by. The townhouse was not detached, and I had two neighbors whose homes were directly attached to my own. I got along fine with my southernmost neighbor, aka we said hi when we saw each other, and that was about it. But the other neighbor, he had a chip on his shoulder. Generally rude if we bumped into each other. I'd say hi or good morning. He'd ignore me, scowl, turn away, etc. Whatever, no big deal. I just took it in stride. Being a struggling college student, I didn't have a lot of money for non-essentials. Most of the people in the neighborhood poured weed killers on their lawns every spring. I didn't do this for several reasons. Most importantly, I think it's a shame to poison the local water table. And while I love a nice lawn, I don't think you have to cater to grass. I prefer a more natural look. Back then, that meant regular grass, but with some crabgrass and dandelions. One day, Bob starts berating me over my dandelions. "It doesn't fit the neighborhood. Don't you have any self-respect? You bring down the tone of the neighborhood." Every time he'd see me, he'd tell me I need to pour poison on my lawn, which I explained I couldn't afford and didn't want to do. At first, I was polite, as I wanted to be on good terms with my neighbors, but Bob started getting angrier and more unreasonable, started calling me poor white trash. One day, I'm coming home, parking in my driveway with some friends from school in my car. As we're getting out, Bob comes outside and shouts at the top of his lungs, "Get rid of those effing dandelions!" He looks over and now spots my friends getting out of the car, and he's clearly embarrassed, but he doubled down and started talking directly to my friends. "Do you know your friend is an embarrassment to the neighborhood? How's it feel to be friends with white trash?" I had just about had enough of his anger by then, and I snapped back, told him to F off and mind his own business. Several days later, I get a knock on my front door, open up the door, and it's a bylaw enforcement officer, says he's responding to complaints of noxious weeds in my backyard, and asks to come take a look for himself. Being a middle unit, the only access to my backyard was through the house. I invite him in, offer him a drink, which he gratefully accepts, hot day, and take him through the backyard. Lots of lovely white and yellow dandelions peppered over the yard. He takes one look and gives a deep sigh. There were no noxious weeds, which I knew full well, as I had long ago taken the precaution of checking with the city to see what was and was not acceptable in the weed department, and I knew I was, well, very comfortably within compliance. The bylaw cop apologized for wasting my time, said my yard was nowhere near a problem. He left and went next door to chastise my neighbor for wasting his time. I stood at my front door and listened. It was glorious listening to Bob sputtering and angry, trying to defend himself and vilify me, all to no avail. My wife and I can't even sit out and enjoy our backyard because of all those stupid dandelions. Bylaw cop told him to stop harassing his neighbors and left. The bylaw officer's visit is the perfect turning point. Not only did you get official validation that your lawn was fine, but Bob got a public scolding from the very authority he tried to summon. It's the moment his imagined power evaporated. But listening in gave me an idea. I knew Bob liked to sit out on his back deck in the afternoons, so I waited. As soon as I spotted him out there, I walked out into my backyard, ignoring Bob as I gathered up a nice bouquet of white-topped dandelions, seeds ready to disperse to the wind. We had a 4-foot-high chain-link fence between our properties, so the view between yards was pretty much unobstructed. I stood at the fence, locked eyes with Bob, and started blowing thousands of dandelion seeds into his yard. The wind was at my back, so the seeds were traveling quite far into his yard. He grew red-faced and started yelling at me. "What's the matter, Bob? I'm just doing what you asked, getting rid of my dandelions." He yelled more, and I just ignored him. After depositing several dandelions worth of seeds, he went back inside. From that day forward, for the next several weeks, every single time I saw him out on his deck, I'd go out and send more dandelion seeds into his yard. Eventually, dandelion flowering season ended. I want to think that Bob learned a lesson about bullying. Stories like this always remind me how often conflict isn't really about the surface issue. It wasn't the dandelions. If you'd removed them, Bob would have found something else. The height of your grass, the color of your door, the way you parked. People who crave control rarely run out of material. But here's the part I admire most. You didn't let his opinion redefine how you lived in your own space. At 24, many people cave just to avoid tension, especially when they feel financially vulnerable. Instead, you trusted your judgment and the actual regulations. That's quiet confidence, and it tends to age very well. And our last story. The old owner let me isn't a property deed. I bought a house a few months ago and officially moved in last month. The previous owner was a genuinely nice older man who'd lived there for years, but his health had declined to the point where living alone wasn't safe anymore. He sold the house and moved in with his daughter, which is how I ended up buying the place. Everything about the sale was straightforward, friendly, and drama-free. Or so I thought. What I didn't know at the time was that the old owner had been letting his neighbor, who insists she's disabled, use his driveway whenever she felt like it. I'm putting disabled in quotation marks because, as far as I can tell, the issue isn't mobility in the medical sense so much as extreme obesity paired with a deep sense of entitlement. Whether that legally counts or not, it isn't really my problem, but it does matter for context. Street parking in this neighborhood is a nightmare. The houses are close together, most people own at least one car, and whatever street parking exists gets snapped up almost immediately. If you don't have a driveway, you're usually walking 5 minutes or more from wherever you manage to park, and that's on a good day. Apparently, the previous owner felt bad for her and let her use his driveway, temporarily, which somehow turns into forever in her mind. I learned all of this on moving day. I pulled up with a moving truck and immediately noticed a massive SUV parked squarely in my driveway. At first, I assumed it was a contractor or someone connected to the move, but the movers told me it wasn't theirs and they couldn't wait long on the busy road without risking a ticket. So I did what any confused new homeowner would do and started knocking on doors asking whose car it was. After about 10 minutes of knocking and confused neighbors shrugging at me, I finally found the right house. I knocked, waited, knocked again, and eventually the door swung open to reveal an extremely angry, very sweaty woman glaring at me like I'd personally insulted her entire bloodline. I calmly explained that her SUV was parked in my driveway and needed to be moved immediately because the movers were unloading my belongings. She snapped back that the nice old man next door said it was fine. I told her that the nice old man no longer lived there. I did, and it was not fine. This was my driveway and she needed to move her car now. She argued loudly about how unfair it was, how she had permission, how she couldn't walk far. I repeated, slower this time, that I owned the house now, and that permission ended when ownership changed. Eventually, with a dramatic huff and a muttered string of insults, she went to move the car. About half an hour later, I saw her trudging back home, drenched in sweat, shooting daggers at my house the entire way. I figured that was the end of it. It was not. A few days later, I went back to work for the first time since moving in. When I got home, there it was again, the same SUV parked in my driveway like nothing had ever happened. I walked straight over to her house and knocked, and knocked, and knocked. 20 minutes later, she finally opened the door, already furious. I told her again that she needed to move her car. She tried a new angle this time, saying her ankles couldn't handle the walk and that I was young and could easily park farther away. I told her that while that might technically be true, it didn't matter. It was my driveway and I intended to use it. Public sympathy doesn't override property lines. Once again, she moved the car. Once again, I saw her sweaty, exhausted march back home later, glaring at me like I'd personally forced her into a marathon. At this point, I was irritated, but still trying to be civil. I figured she'd eventually get the message. Then it happened a third time. This time, when I went to her door, she didn't answer. I could hear movement inside, but the door stayed closed. I knocked, nothing. I rang the bell, nothing. I waited, annoyed, standing on my own front lawn, staring at a car that didn't belong there, so I stopped being polite. I called a tow truck. This is the only language she was ever going to understand. Reasoning failed, warnings failed. The tow truck's the inevitable, logical conclusion when someone treats your property like their own and refuses to listen to words. You didn't escalate, you simply moved from negotiation to enforcement. When the SUV disappeared, she suddenly found the energy to come screaming over to my house, demanding to know where her car was and how dare I do this to her. I told her exactly what I'd done and why. I also told her to get off my property before I called the police. She screamed a bit more, called me heartless, and eventually waddled back home. A few days later, I had a short fence installed across the driveway entrance, complete with a lock. It wasn't expensive, and it solved the problem instantly. Her SUV has not been in my driveway since. Now I get dirty looks every time I see her. Another neighbor has joined in, clearly of the opinion that I should have continued sacrificing my driveway out of the goodness of my heart. When I told my mom the whole story, she said I should try to be nicer to people and that the woman clearly struggles. And yeah, I do feel a little bad when I see her sweating and exhausted from the walk. I'm not completely heartless. But here's the thing, struggling doesn't entitle you to someone else's property. Being inconvenienced doesn't give you the right to ignore clear boundaries, and the old owner said it was okay stops mattering the moment the old owner moves out. I didn't buy a house so my driveway could remain a community resource for someone who refuses to accept change. I bought it so I could actually park in it. All three stories are about restoring balance when someone tries to take what you've earned. Your credit, your peace, or your property. The dandelion revenge is poetically petty, and the driveway showdown's a lesson in firm boundaries, but story one wins for its surgical professional justice. Adding that rolls page wasn't sabotage, it was documentation. It let the truth speak for itself at the exact moment he needed it to lie for him. That's not just karma, it's strategy. Vote in the comments. Which story handled it best? 1, 2, or 3? Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.